Hello, and welcome to this LitX panel on Pride in Comics, presented by LitX as part of ReadPop's Pride Month programming. I'm Jason Nisavic, and I'll be your moderator today. And we're going to have a conversation with some experts when it comes to using comics in educational settings with an eye towards LGBTQ representation. So before we get into our conversation, I'd like to thank you for watching this panel, because that means that you want to expand the horizons of maybe yourself or the people in your educational setting, because representation matters. And in this particular month, we've had the good news of the Supreme Court upholding Title VII and preventing discrimination against LGBTQ people in the workplace. But also we have cause now as much as ever to remind people that not only do Black Lives Matter, but also trans lives matter, and Black trans lives matter. And so this is also, it's all interconnected, and this is part of that conversation because we carry these experiences into the classroom for our students. And it's very important for them to see themselves in the things that we teach. And so I want to start by introducing our panelists. I'm going to share very briefly their names and information, so you can pause it or freeze it right here, and you can see exactly who you're dealing with in our conversation today. But we're going to go around, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves, and we'll start with our very first question. What drew you to the comics medium as a tool for positive change? And so because you're in the first box on my screen, I'm going to start with you, Adan. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Adan Alvarado. I'm an educator here in Chicago. I thought about this question a lot, like when you sent it out. I fell asleep thinking about this question, and I didn't really have a good answer. To be honest, like what drew me in? It's just comics, for one thing, has always been something that I just sort of, was part of my life. So it's just always been that sort of instrument for me for just thinking about things and really thinking critically about whatever's going on. In regards to the classroom, I'll say there was one moment when the class was reading Pride of Baghdad, where just like certain responses started happening as they went deeper into that work. Where I thought, all right, like so, like they're reacting to this, medium in a way that they don't react to other things. So I think that was one thing in which I thought, like, all right, this is something that I should be using a lot more in the classroom, and this is something due to the pacing and other things that students have a different reaction to, right? Not to say that they don't have really positive and strong reactions to other mediums, but this was just a different one. So I'd say that was one book that sort of was a light bulb moment as an educator.
Wonderful. Thank you, Adan. Moving over to Dana.
Hi, I am Dana Simpson. I'm from Seattle and live in Southern California. And I'm the creator of the comic Phoebe and Her Unicorn, which is syndicated in, I don't remember how many newspapers, some, and has also been collected now in 11 books. And I think my resume is somewhere around here, right? But in answer to the question, how is the question phrased?
What drew you to the comics medium as a tool for positive change?
I think the fact that I was already there. Comics were just always my medium. Like since I was a little kid and discovered Peanuts and Calvin and Hobbes and thought, I want to do that for a living someday. And then so when I got older and started thinking more about like, okay, how do I actually make the world better? It was kind of the tool that I had there. But I feel like the strength of comics as a tool for, making people more aware of what LGBT experience or any experience is like, is that it sort of combines the immediacy of film with the personal nature of reading. Like when you're reading text, you're reading one person's words, but there's a sort of distance between you and the person who's writing is sort of telling you these things. And when you're watching a film, it's sort of a collaborative effort and there's a lot of voices involved. Comics are like one voice, but with the immediacy of watching events as they actually happen. And I think that can be powerful.
Agreed. Absolutely. Thank you, Dana. Next on my screen, we have Matt from Pop Culture Classroom.
Hi, yeah, I'm Matt. I'm the education program manager at Pop Culture Classroom, a little nonprofit in Denver, Colorado. I've always been a big advocate for using different types of media as learning tools, but was a latecomer to comics. So I got my undergrads in theater, and so like I was like, yeah, let's use theater to change people's lives. And then I became a teacher. Joined Teach for America, and it started with first graders. And you know, when you're doing young elementary, you have lots of picture books, and the picture is part of the experience, right? And so I was like, why do we get rid of the pictures when we get older? Like that's half the fun of reading for these young kids. And so, you know, whereas I think video games can be transformative, I think films can be transformative. Comics and graphic novels are a more quiet and meditative media. When you're reading it, when you're enjoying it, it's a little bit more quiet and solitary. And so I think that allows you to do more reflecting and a little bit more internal processing while you're reading. So yeah, I absolutely think that comics should be in every classroom and used more often.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, being able to linger on a certain image or a certain page and just let it sink in for a moment, that's something that a movie just can't do. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Molly, you're up next.
Okay, how do I follow all of these great answers? I'm Molly Muldoon. I am a librarian, and I'm also an author. I co-wrote Deadweight Murder at Camp Bloom, and I co-wrote one of the many writers of The Cardboard Kingdom. And I kind of fell into comics. I read them as a kid and I kind of fell out of it. But then when I moved back home years and years ago, my only friend who was still in town was trying to become a comics artist, which meant I met all of the local comics artists, and then all of my friends were comics artists, which led them to go, why don't you try writing a thing? And years later, here I am. But that's made me quite an advocate for graphic novels in the library, because I see how they connect with children, especially reluctant. I feel it's such a great tool because kids, they see how thick sometimes a book is and they are not even going to want to touch it. But like they open a graphic novel or a comic, and there's an immediacy, like we were saying, to that grabs them to the point where sometimes their parents are like, it's not a real book. But it is a real book. And I mean, I don't understand people who don't want their children reading certain things, but it connects with kids in a way that works so well, and I think it should just be harnessed even more.
Wonderful. Agreed. And Bianca?
Okay, well, I co-sign a lot of things that other people have said, but as for my story, mine's kind of like a roundabout way of how I kind of got into comics and how I decided to use them as an agency for resistance and activism, and just sharing my story. My mom wanted to draw for Bad magazine when she was younger, so it was like the cool thing, and she was like, wow, this is awesome. And so she always had sort of like that underground satirical comic style in her work, and she never ended up working in comics. She ended up going into fashion design instead. But the way my family would communicate to each other was through drawing comics for one another. And so whenever there was like a chore list or anything like that, it was drawn in comic style. So that became like how I learned how to express myself, how to use my voice, how my family avoided a lot of fights if we like drew things out and we were able to read it and take a pause versus like, you bullied me or whatever, because I have a bunch of siblings. So I started off doing comics just as the way I expressed myself. And I continued that through all of my schooling, drawing comics for my friends, drawing their crushes, drawing my own crushes, and etc. until I was kind of like, I was afraid to put my work out there because I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me in comics. And so I took it as, if I don't see people who look like me, then that must mean that nobody wants it. And so it took a lot of self-encouragement to just be like, just put it out there and hopefully people will come to it. And it turns out that people were hungry for my voice, and you put it out there and build it and they'll come. And that's kind of what's happened. And I use comics as a way to disarm my audience, I could easily go on a platform and talk about the inequalities that happen to Black people, to Black trans people, to Black queer people as a whole. And a lot of times when you're talking at people, they don't want to listen, but using comics is a way to disarm your audience and put the human aspect in it, have them see your heart. And that's why I use it. So I can touch people's hearts and give them a creative and cute way of looking at things than just preaching at them. I grew up in the church, so being preached at, I'm a PK, I'm a preacher's kid, so I'm just like not listening. But yeah, to have that medium is a lot more effective to me.
Sure. And so you could say that you didn't see a space for yourself to inhabit, and so you kind of started creating that space, and then people were gravitating towards that. That is wonderful, and I think it hits exactly upon why we're talking about this today. And so the next questions, they can kind of be related. We can answer them together. We can take them one at a time, however you want to do it. And so next we ask, so in your view, what are the pressing issues, either in the educational setting or in society, that need to be addressed concerning the LGBTQ experience? And if we can answer that question using the works that we either have created or that we're drawn to, I feel like that would be useful. I'm going to start with Adan again, because you mentioned to me that some of your students actually, I think it was this year, came up to you with some specific need for guidance. Is that right?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is definitely just like listen to your students if you're an educator. And what I found out was that when on this subject, what they were really looking for kind of broke down into like 4 things. One was history, right? They wanted like history on like the movement. They were looking for just information. They were looking for like experiences, so like personal experiences. And then I think they were just looking for like voices, right? So like works by people in the LGBTQ community. So I think those things break down. Like there are tons of comics and graphic novels specifically for those things, right? They have, like graphic novels on historical components, right? There's queer graphic history. I think there is one on like the Stonewall Rebellion. I'm not sure. I've never read it. I'm not sure the quality of it. Not to discount anybody's work. But I've heard different things about that. But I know they're interested in that, just like the history of like this community they identify with, and they want to see that history in the classroom, right? They want to be seen in that sense, like where did this come from, and how can I become now a part of it in the present? And then there's obviously the information, right? I think prior to this, we were talking, Molly, you were talking about the quick and easy guides. Like, right, those are just nice informational texts and like nice primers to just get those discussions going for some individuals who might not have that information or that sort of understanding at this point. And then again, the experiences. There's so many great memoirs now. Like I think like the Maggie Thrash has a couple. Obviously, Alison Bechdel. What is it? Maya Kobabe just had one last year. So like, there's just so many memoirs like the document that documents those experiences that you can bring into the classroom those students want to hear. And then lastly, just like the voices part is just like, hey, give me works that are by these creators, right? Like, and they can be anything from like Tilly Walding or I don't know. There's so many recently now, right? Like even something like Giant Days, right? Or what is the Laura Dean keeps breaking up with me? Like, there's just so many works now, right? That just like represent these voices. Melanie Gilman. So I think that's what students were looking for, like in the classroom itself, is like, hey, I want to know like about this movement, about this community that I identify with. I want to hear those creators in the classroom. I want to sort of live those experiences, through these different memoirs and stuff like that. And I think just the comic medium is just doing such amazing stuff in all those fields that it just provides so many opportunities to bring those things into the classroom.
For sure. Now, during your comments just now, you brought up the quick and easy guides. Yep. And so Molly, being associated with the quick and easy guide to consent, for example. So what drew you to those specific topics to be addressed in those works?
I just think they're a great, like you were saying, a great primer, because they don't go into like they're not going to tell you every single thing that there
Right.
is to know about a subject, but they will give you the information to further educate yourself should you want to do that, and just give you enough basic understanding to get through, to not embarrass yourself, hopefully, in situations, and just give you the empathy to understand that at least there is a different situation than perhaps you're aware of. And I think they're a great series. I know there's more ones coming down the pipeline. So there are 3 right now, just they, them pronouns, queer and trans identities, and quick and easy guide to consent just came out, I think maybe 2 weeks ago. So those are definitely ones to look out for. They're really great.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned about being a really quick access, like a primer, is great. One of the I keynote a sex ed camp every summer that's a church camp, and we have a mix of very conservative congregations and a little bit more liberal congregations, and they know that I'm super gay and they let me keynote, but some of these kids that come from conservative congregations just don't have the words or the language or kind of any idea, and so giving them a book that is this thick, that is a graphic novel and can be read within, you know, an hour to 2 hours, it's just a great starting point, and they're always so much more understanding and are more willing to learn once they've kind of had that initial discussion with themselves.
You know, something I also think is super important that I don't think anybody has brought up yet is in addition to having books that are sort of specifically address these issues and that educate people, whether, you know, people who are LGBTQ themselves, people who are not but are looking to learn about it, I think is just the casual presence of LGBTQ characters in other stuff. Like, most of my work is not specifically about this. I've illustrated a picture book by and about a 12-year-old trans boy and his journey to come out. It's called I'm Not a Girl. It's coming out in August. I find that stuff really important, and I'm honored to be part of it. But I also, like, Phoebe and Her Unicorn is not specifically an LGBT work at all. It's just about a kid who's friends with a unicorn. But I like to, you know, just do representation for the sake of representation. Like, okay, in this story arc here, we have a unicorn. I introduced about a year ago this unicorn who is non-binary, and uses this unicorn's pronoun is "nay," which I thought was funny, but then I had to, like, write around that for the whole rest of the time, rest of forever. But you want to know how many newspapers wouldn't run the strips where this character was explaining their identity? 1, the Deseret News in Salt Lake City. The rest of the country, places that run my strip, just, here's this non-binary character, and they're just here now, and it's not a big deal to any of the other characters. And I feel like for me as a kid, that would have been really great. Everything I read growing up, I was a little trans kid in an era when nobody around me had any awareness that was a thing you could be. And so in addition to, you know, resources that would have told me what the heck I was supposed to do about this, it would have been nice if just picking up a book that could just be a character that was like me, that was part of the story. I feel like seeing that would have made me feel a whole lot more normal. And I try to do that for my young readers now.
Anybody know the show Schitt's Creek? Yeah.
Yeah.
So they just wrapped, right? They had a documentary episode, and there's many LGBT characters in that show. And one of the things they did consciously was they never portrayed any sort of againstness. I don't know. That is not the word I'm looking for. But there was never any character that said anything against those characters, right? And so while it may not be realistic, quote unquote, just having that as a show that people could watch does give youth the idea that, oh, people can exist and be happy, right? It's not always the adversity. That was the word I was looking for. It's not always the adversity. It's not always the coming out story, but people can exist and be happy.
Yeah, I feel like being trans and being LGBT is often presented as something that you're sort of constantly struggling with, and I feel like the struggle needs to be represented, but so does the fact that a lot of the time we're just people that exist. I think it's important for non-LGBT people to see that too, that being trans does not define me.
Mm-hmm.
Bianca, we haven't gotten a chance to get to you yet. Do you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, I agree with, is it Dana or Dinah?
Dana.
Dana, I agree with Dana, because I think it's so important for the youth to see themselves just having regular life. I think it's important to have a bit of both. We need to know our history, especially as if you look outside and what's happening now. A lot of things that are happening right now is because we refuse to look at our own history. So, and it's doomed to repeat ourselves. So it's really important to, I'm not saying like, don't give kids historic literature, but it's also important for them to just have normalcy and regular life and regular things that happen. And that's why I love, you know, Laura Dean or Mooncakes or Archival Quality or books like that that interweave queer and Black stories and Asian stories, and they kind of just coexist. Because I know as a little Black child, I was exhausted that the only representation that I got was a biopic. I got to learn about the Truth, I got to learn about Harriet Tubman, I got to learn about Rosa Parks, but I wanted to know about just like some Black queer punk kid that just liked to skateboard or whatever. Like that's what I wanted. Like I get, and it kind of just feels like when you only have historic texts, it kind of feels like they're put on a pedestal. And they're like, these are those, and they get to go over here in the museum, but they're not real, actual people that pooped. And like, have that to have just like, I love stories where the focus isn't necessarily the center, like their identity politics isn't necessarily the center of the story. It's just interwoven into the story. And one of my favorite examples of this is Raspberry Beret by Prince. If you listen to the lyrics, he opens the song talking about his racist boss and then pivots into talking about this beautiful person that he saw that wore a raspberry beret. And you kind of forget that the song is opened about him singing about his racist boss. And that's what it's like to exist as a person under any sort of oppression. Yeah, we have this stuff going on over here, but we also love and we live and we drive our motorcycles and we dance and we are free. And that's what people need to see. They need to see us being free and not just existing under oppression.
Oh, what?
Yes, I think there's a wonderful point that we've all been kind of dancing around, and Dana and Bianca, I think you nailed it, where it's just the mere exposure effect. You know, even if it's not, you know, a comic that's specifically about LGBTQ issues, just having that exist around people longer and longer is definitely going to move the needle in the direction of acceptance. You know, that's the hope. And so that kind of ties into the next kind of question to direct here. How can comics and similar mediums be used to address these issues? We've already talked about the mere exposure effect. I know, Bianca, you talked about some specific titles that you love that kind of immerse us in these experiences. So we can get specific, feel free, because I'm sure that people are coming here looking for recommendations. So are there any specific titles, or are there any just like general things that you think comics can do very well in terms of addressing these issues?
Me specifically?
Oh yeah, we can start with you, 100%.
I mean, there's so many, and I'm not close enough to my library to reach for things, but this one, it's specific, but it talks about other things. And one thing that I really like about Archival Quality, or even like my lesbian experience with loneliness, is it talks about mental illness, which is something that I feel like a lot of people within the community deal with because of trauma or just plain old depression. I think it's almost like we focus more on the mental illness aspects of dealing with your anxiety and dealing with your depression than just solely on I'm depressed because I'm queer. It's better interwoven. And I'm trying to think of other titles of work. I mean, again, Mooncakes is a great story because it dives into Asian culture. There's some fantasy in there, but again, it's still like a queer story. There's a person that's deaf in the story, so we're getting disability representation, and it's all just kind of just sprinkled in there. And then again, a lot of us mentioned Laura Dean which I think is just like a really cute just love story that every kid experience.
It's
like,
so good.
And it's like the perfect can I swear? I don't know if I can swear or not. No.
I don't know. So let's say no. Well, I'm post, so I don't know if I don't know how to do that. So
I'll say soft boy instead of the other term. That's a lot. But like, who has not fallen short and dated someone like a Laura Dean and racked your brain around it and felt like you were the worst person on the earth? I think it's so important it is pivotal for queer kids to see abusive relationships represented, because how often have we fallen into one ourselves because we thought this is what love is supposed to be like, because we didn't experience love in other avenues. And so we took whatever love we could get, and it turns out that this person is crap. So I think that is really, because again, like abuse and oppression are like interwoven in types of power and control. And these kids need to be able to see these stories represented so they can have their own self-agency and they can speak up themselves and be like, wait a minute, my partner does this, and the person I have a crush on does that, and it makes me feel gross. And now I don't feel crazy when I try to talk to my friends about it, and they're like, oh, well, that's normal, or I don't know, maybe they're mean to you because they like you. And it's just like, no, that's not okay.
Yeah, Laura Dean, speaking personally, is like the closest, is closer to my high school experience than like any coming out story I've ever read. Like, in having that, if I had read that back then, like how much of an impact it would have had.
For sure. Adan, have you worked with that before?
With what? With Laura Dean keeps breaking up with me. I haven't yet. No, I do want to use it though. I mean, there's so many titles now that like we're talking about, just like with the stories, right? There's like Heavy Vinyl, there's Slam, there's this, I mean, all these works now are bringing in all these different voices from these different communities, and they're just existing together, which is incredible. I think that goes into like the voice part, where students just want to hear those stories, again, not tied to the oppression of that community, but just that community living their lives. And I think you mentioned about like how like we could use them, right? You mentioned how we use some of these works. I think that's interesting. I think there's like a couple different ways. One of them is definitely like from an analytical standpoint, just taking a look at them, just analyzing how these characters are existing and living. And I was reading an interview that you gave, Dana, where you talk about like Phoebe sort of being like a retcon of your childhood. Do you remember this? Like,
yeah, I mean, that's Phoebe is not specifically about trans issues, but in a way, Phoebe is my therapy, because yeah, she's the little girl I never quite got to be.
And like Marigold as this inner voice.
Marigold is sort of, yeah, Marigold is more like, she's a self-portrait of a different kind. Marigold the unicorn, Marigold Heavenly Nostrils, which is a name I got typing my name into an online unicorn name generator.
Would also be a great name for a drag queen.
The part of me that goes, yeah, you're great, without any of the other voices going, yes, but here's your flaws. Marigold is my personified self-love. And Phoebe is just me at 9 with all the attendant issues.
Yeah, so when I was reading that, and I thought it was just an explanation on your part, and just that interview I just loved, because it just talks about how like we can take a look at these works, right, and just like sort of analyzing for like how these characters are interacting and who they are, and like all the different other characters that come into their lives and who the authors are. So I think that part too, just sort of analyzing these different works as we will any other works, allows those stories really to come to life, and for students to make that connection with not only those characters but those works and where they're coming from. So I love that. There's also like the element of just using comics to sort of tell your stories. I think one great way to do it right now is like through music, right? So like students want to talk about music, right? If there's one thing that students want to talk about and want to like just give you all the things that they're listening to is music, right? Because they connect to that on such a personal level. And one thing for sure is like Bianca, you wrote the Devil's Music, right? The Devil's Music zine. And like, there's another Chicago artist like Andrea Bell does this like zine called Tracks, which is just such a cool idea because it allows students to sort of express and tell their story through like this mini comic / zine, medium. So not only just should we be like reading comics, but we should be encouraging students to sort of explore that medium through creation of comics too. And I think just a good way just for like educators out there just to jump in is through music, right? Like if you're able to sort of craft this like, hey, just tell this quick narrative about like you sort of did in Devil's Music, which I thought was like just brilliant stuff. Tell us a quick narrative about like your life, and you'll see how much they're able to sort of tell their story, express their thoughts about where they're at, their community, and it doesn't have to be like anything specific, but it's just that medium and that ability to create these mini comics or these zines just really gets them sort of willing to sort of just start finding their own voice, right? Which is ultimately what we're trying to do with all of this, right? Is to sort of like, hey, we want you to be seen, we want you to be heard, we want you to feel comfortable here, ultimately so that you can begin to develop your own voice and express yourself in a meaningful way. And I think comics is a great way to do that as well, in terms of creating them.
I think we also have to start that early, right? I think a lot of the books we've talked about so far are kind of YA, but specifically, Cardboard Kingdom. There's another book, Max and the Midnights. Those two books are perfect for, second to fourth or fifth grade. And what's great about those books is they're both ensemble pieces, right? And so it's not just focusing on one protagonist. You have multiple main characters. And in each of those characters all are kind of going through their own internal struggles, their own issues with things, whether it be things at home or identity or anything like that. And I think what that allows younger students to do is to realize that each student has their own problems, right? But then other students or other friends, they might have problems that just because they don't see them doesn't mean that they aren't real problems with those students. And so it really helps with that empathy piece, right? And then you take that and you say, okay, now I want you to tell your story, or a story that, you can relate to, right? So, you see this kid in Cardboard Kingdom whose parents are going through a divorce, or this kid who likes to dress up as the princess, right? How can you express some sort of issue that you're going through the medium of comics? And just like you said, Adan, have them start creating their own works. And that starts building voice in writing, which is so incredibly important for young writers and young students, as well as just realizing that their voice has importance and value, and how much power telling your story can have.
For sure. And I like kind of a theme that you both touched on, Adan and Matt, is that you have the comics present, in your education, but that's only part of the balanced breakfast that you have, connecting through students through music, which I personally do in my classroom setting. I love talking music with them because, they get to teach me stuff that way, and it lets them feel more empowered. Making this part of the larger effort to help our LGBTQ students feel included and feel seen is definitely part of the prescription, and comics can definitely help us do that. Molly, can you give us the librarian perspective?
I mean, it's a lot of what you guys are saying. We don't necessarily get to talk a kid through a book or like discuss the book with the child while they're reading it, but we're the ones that can put those books in kids' hands, get them excited about reading them. If they come in and say, I loved this book, we're the ones that are like, okay, we got 5 more for you. Like, I was a bookseller before I was a librarian. So like, this has been my thing for a very long time. And it's fun. It's fun to see what kids relate to and have that like constant category in your head of like, okay, they liked Cardboard Kingdom. Let me get them, and just, it's fun to see kids come back over and over again. Constantly excited things, and unfortunately with everything going on, I don't get to see them like I did, but we still see them get returned, and people put things on hold, so we get to get them, and I get really excited when I see kids put books on hold that I'm excited about. Like, it makes me want to write a note and put it in. That'd be a little creepy. But, like, you're gonna love this. Yeah. But yeah, it's the same kind of thing.
that makes you the best kind of person for where you are, because you're so passionate about it. I'm sure that passion bleeds out into everybody that you deal with. You're like, yes, you're gonna love this. That's amazing. So let's imagine for a second that I'm someone who is tuning into this panel, and I am either a brand new teacher or I'm a librarian who's trying to maybe start an education program, and I don't really know where to start. What are some of the first steps that you would recommend to me as someone who hasn't really opened my eyes to this before, but now I'm like, okay, I want to get started teaching, and broadening my students' experiences? Let's go ahead and start with Matt, since you're in the educational programming.
Yeah, I would say definitely look how other teachers are instructing graphic novels, first of all, right? What sort of projects are they doing that associate with the graphic novels? What are they pairing with? On our website, on popcultureclassroom.org, we have a library of teaching guides for graphic novels. And while it may not be one for the exact book that you want to teach, I still think you can go and take some of those project ideas and think about how you can associate them. And I think the other thing is just don't be scared. I know as an educator, sometimes it's scary to breach that line of talking about a taboo subject or a subject that someone might consider to be taboo, right? But it's a lot easier to ask for forgiveness and permission. There was a time when I was afraid of parent backlash of just handing out certain books, right? Oh God, what if a parent sees these two boys kissing in this comic, right? And I think you just have to get over that. And go ahead and give it to them. And, if someone says something, then there's resources where you can go to have that conversation about it. But you can't let that fear stop you from possibly initiating those conversations.
We, of course, don't want anyone to, if you feel threatened or if you feel like your job is on the line, we, of course, urge you to be, cautious and protect yourself.
Yes, for sure.
The older teachers like myself who have tenure, after I got tenure, I did feel more bold and more willing to have those conversations. But yes, a lot of times students in educational settings, they need an ally. They need somebody who they can look up to and trust. Because if you think that you work in a large school and you don't think you have a significant population of LGBTQ students, you're probably wrong. They just don't want to open up to you. They just don't know if you're the type of person that they can look to for guidance and trust. So wonderful. Thank you, Matt. Any thoughts, Molly, on day one getting started?
I mean, there's so many resources online that you can go and look at, and especially if you're a librarian, you should know how to find them. That is part of library school. But and then also just read books yourself. Find things that you enjoy. If you enjoy them, your kids might enjoy them as well. Like I feel like I'll recommend books that I haven't read, but I'm always way more excited about the books that I have read and I've enjoyed. So just getting your own familiarity with the medium and the books that are available is going to be so helpful for you.
I would say just really quick, webcomics and zines, because they're dope and they pack a big punch in just like a small amount of time, which is nice when you're in the classroom. There's also like the resources are a lot more available. So like I know just ones that I've used Bianca zines, I've used Andrew Bell, I've used Ben Passmore, Richie Pope, right? So like these are things that like these works just pack so much into it and really have a lot of material just for a lot of enriching conversations. Again, in a short period of time often, right? So like often the thing you hear from educators is they don't have the room in their curriculum. They don't have the resources. So that's why I always push like webcomics. There's like Mildred Lewis. There's like, and I feel so bad, but I can't think of the dude who he writes like Trill League, but his is a webcomic too. Like there's like just so many like great resources available to educators. And they not only are they available, but again, they're probably more conducive to you being able to sort of do these lesson plans, work on these things, and also just sharing anything that you can, creating a library, because you also don't want to make it like, I mean, anytime I feel bad sometimes bringing in, sorry, Bianca, your work and Ben Passmore, and because I think like I think I just made this thing like 20% less cool by me bringing it in, sharing in the classroom with them. But like, I love it, and they ultimately love it too. But like, also just giving them that that space to be like, this thing's just dope. Just check it out. Like, we don't have to. It doesn't have to be a lesson or a thing that we discuss in class. Just check it out because it's gonna be enriching for you. It'll be dope. Just read it. Also just bringing those things in for them.
Wonderful. Bianca, any thoughts?
I can speak on a few things. I teach comics at the college level, and as a Black queer person, I did face some backlash. I did get written up for sharing queer comics with my students, by the students. And so with teaching at a conservative school, not all of the students were open to hearing stories of people who were not cis, white, and heterosexual. And so I got some complaints from the students for trying to change their minds or try to bring politics into the classroom and things like that, and keep politics out of the classroom. And for me, I cannot change these things about myself. And so I don't necessarily think that I'm like, oh, I am, by making my students read a comic that isn't starring a white person, I'm being subversive, because I'm not, I can never code switch into white culture and disappear. Like, I just will always, I have pink hair right now, like, that's a choice, but still, like, so
straight identity isn't political. Everyone else is political just for existing.
Yeah. And so I continue to share that work, though. Like, even though I've always been kind of the person that's just like, plant a seed, though. Even if they may resist it now, I also understand that they are under the jurisdiction of their parents' beliefs. And so they may be vocal about this because at home they can't feel comfortable to share that maybe my parents aren't the law and all of their ideas are the truth. Maybe I need to, my friends are like this or so forth. Maybe I need to expand that. And so that's why I still share it, because I want them, again, to see the humanity of people who are different from them. On the flip side, the students who are people of color or queer or intersection of the two have always been great for me showing that work, and I will continue to do it even if it costs me my job, because I choose just not to live in fear. I just can't anymore. I have to just be radical and loud, because people are losing their life over it. So this is kind of like, you gotta just do it. And in my situation, there were things set in place for my protection, that I could file a complaint myself and be like, please protect me under these issues. And that was great. But it's still something that may come up. And I also understand that, listen, if you got to pay bills, you got a job, sometimes you do have to just stay quiet about things. I will not judge you for doing that. Protect yourself, protect your life. Again, these are sometimes giving matters of life or death. And there's been times in my life where I had to keep my head down about something. So it happens. But if you can kind of just sneak it into the curriculum and just, be like, oops, I'm no longer gay, whoops. Just do it. It's important for them to see that. And it's also, I went to the University of Illinois. I remember being the only Black kid in my class often and constantly. You go through art history, you read nothing and study nothing but works of old white men from the past. And you kind of feel, again, it builds that narrative that you are not important because you are not being celebrated at this level. So nothing that you will do will ever reach this level of importance, because we've been studying some of these dudes for hundreds of years, and yet we still continue to talk about them. And then we either have like a month of celebration for people who are not white, or we kind of have like one day where we talk about things. It's just like, okay, now here's where we're going to put all of the people of color, all of the queer people, all of the women into one day. And then we're going to go back and talk about some white dude. And I just like felt like, again, it just kind of just built this thing where I was just like, okay, no one's ever going to care for my voice. And so that's why I have to put those types of works that are different from the mass majority into my lessons plans, because I don't want any child to come into my class and feel like they do not matter. I don't want any child to come to class and feel like, oh, well, I didn't see anything from Asian artists, or I didn't see anything from Indigenous artists, or I didn't see anything from, there's so much to tell. And so we read a lot in my classes, and I feel like that's important. I feel like I teach making comics, so I feel like the best way to learn how to make comics is to read other people's work. And so we read a lot of other people's work, and you find something that inspires you, and you keep going from there. But yeah, I mean, we know that it's not always rainbows and good days. Sometimes it sucks trying to speak up for yourself, and sometimes you face backlash for that, but you got to keep going. And that's why we're in the streets today, because we got to keep going.
And you'll make mistakes too. As an educator, you're gonna make mistakes. I was teaching a Latin American literature course, and we went over a bunch of stuff. But at the end, I had a student come up to me like near the end of that semester and was like, "Hey, like we didn't read anything by, a Colombian author," and they were upset. And that was valid, right? Like I tried going all those things, but I didn't hit them all. I didn't get it, and they happened to be Colombian, and they wanted to see something from the heritage in which they grew up in, and I didn't get there, right? So you listen to your students, learn from your mistakes, and correct them, right, and move on, and be cognizant as you move forward.
Can I say?
Okay, believe it or not, I'm so sorry. We're actually at the end of our panel. So Dana, I'm going to give you the last word, and then we're going to go around, and we're going to. Okay, go ahead.
What I was going to say, I was going to be short anyway. I'm not an educator. I'm not a librarian. I'm a person that makes comics, but I am a former closeted LGBTQ child. And I feel like I was failed in this area, because I feel like everybody in my generation was failed in this area. So for those of you that are here and those of you that are watching, just thank you. You are definitely making some kids' world brighter.
Very well said. And so I want to go around very quickly around the ring here. And if you have any work that you want to promote, or any last minute messages you want to tell the people before we sign off. So why don't we go ahead and start with Molly?
Oh, okay. I don't have anything that's been announced yet that I can promote, but there is a Cardboard Kingdom 2 coming out next spring. So if you liked the first one, there's another one. Check it out.
Okay, wonderful. Matt, anything from Pop Culture Classroom?
Two works I want to shout out that are not Pop Culture Classroom, but relevant. Kiss Number 8 is a recent graphic novel that I think touches on a lot of issues with a different perspective. And then the other one I want to shout out is it's called A Normal Lost Phone. It is actually a game for your phone in which you pick up a lost phone, and your job is to kind of like pick through it to find out what this person's life was. And without spoiling the end of the game, it is extremely relevant to this conversation, and it's less than $5. And so it's another great resource to either give to kids or play through yourself to learn a thing or two about an experience that you might not be familiar with. At Pop Culture Classroom, we've got live streams going on once a week right now. We're doing things like streaming Mario Maker, Super Mario Maker, and like art tutorials. So if you find us on social media, you can stay up to date with the things that we're doing.
Wonderful. Bianca?
I'm just going to say that just check out my social media. My schedule is all over the place. I'm doing all types of things. I'm not sure when this is going to go up, if people are going to miss things that I'm doing, but I'm doing some workshops. I am doing some live readings. Just check out to my social media to get all the information at that. And everything is under Bianca Xinuse. And now you know how to say it. It's Xinuse, because I know a lot of people are afraid to attack that. And I also have a bunch of comics on Gumroad / Bianca Xinuse. So just throw that in there. And if you want to hang out with me, just tweet me.
Thank you, Bianca. Dana?
I'm going to plug I'm Not a Girl, which I illustrated, and it was written by Maddox Lyons and Jessica Verdi. And Maddox is an amazing kid. He's 12, and he wrote a book about what it was like getting his parents to understand that he was a boy. And I illustrated it, and it's coming out in August, and I think it's a lovely and important little book. And it's a picture book, like for younger readers. And it was going to come out in May. It's coming out in August because of the virus. And I'm excited for it, and I hope it reaches some kids who need it. And what the heck, I'm going to plug Phoebe and her Unicorn Book 12, Virtual Unicorn Experience, which comes out in September.
Yes.
Wonderful. Adan?
Yeah, so I mean, all I would say is go check out all the panelists on this all work, because they're all dope. Dana, love your stuff. It's set from middle school, but I definitely bring in some of those Phoebe and Unicorn stories into the classroom, no problem, in high school, because they're amazing and relevant. Bianca's stuff is fire. Like, check out her stuff for sure. Matt, Pop Culture Classroom, always doing it. Tons of resources for an educator. Molly, Cardboard Kingdom, incredible. Looking forward to number 2. Just the structure of that work was just interesting as can be. So I was just about to curse too, Bianca. So yeah, just check out these creators' works. They're amazing.
Awesome. So thank you again to all of our panelists, and thank you for stopping by. Thanks to LitX and ReadHop, and have a great Pride Month, and have a good day.